Imagine losing the love of your life. Now imagine that decades later, you discover their voice is still echoing through one of the busiest transit systems in the world, heard by millions of strangers every single day. What would you do? Would you let it fade into memory, or would you chase that voice, riding the rails just to hear those familiar words one more time? In the heart of London's underground, beneath the feet of rushing commuters and oblivious tourists, one elderly woman became a ghost herself, haunting the platforms not for revenge or unfinished business, but for something far more powerful: love that refused to die, even when death had already won. This is the story of Margaret McCullum, and the voice that kept her coming back, day after day, year after year. Before we dive into this incredible tale, trust me fam, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this, stories that remind us what it means to be human, that's what we're all about here. Drop a comment below telling us, what would you do to keep a memory of someone you loved alive? Now let's get into it. The year is 2013. Margaret McCullum is in her 80s, a widow living alone in London. But every single day, without fail, she boards the northern line of the London Underground. She doesn't have anywhere particular to go. She doesn't have appointments to keep or friends to visit at the end of the line. No, Margaret rides the tube for one reason and one reason only. She wants to hear her husband's voice. You see, in 1950, more than 60 years before Margaret became a regular fixture on the Northern Line, a young man named Oswald Laurence was hired by the London Underground to record station announcements. Back then, the Underground was modernizing, moving away from live announcers to recorded messages that could play consistently throughout the day. Oswald, with his clear, crisp, distinctly British accent, was perfect for the job. Among the announcements he recorded was one simple phrase that would echo through history: mind the gap. If you've ever been to London, you know this phrase. It's iconic. It's been printed on t-shirts, mocked in comedy sketches, referenced in movies. Mind the gap refers to the space between the train and the platform, a warning to watch your step as you board or exit. It's practical, necessary, and for most people, completely forgettable. But for Margaret McCullum, those three words became a lifeline. Oswald Laurence wasn't just the voice of the Underground. He was a real person, with dreams and fears and a life beyond those recordings. Born in 1922, Oswald had a gift for performance and elocution. In another life, he might have been an actor or a radio personality. Instead, he lent his voice to one of the world's most famous transit systems, becoming an invisible presence in the lives of millions. In the late 1940s, Oswald met Margaret. By all accounts, their love story was the kind that romance novels are written about. They married, built a life together, and for decades, they were inseparable. Oswald would joke with Margaret about his recordings, probably never imagining that his voice would outlive him by decades, certainly never imagining that it would one day become the only way his beloved wife could still hear him speak. In 2001, Oswald Laurence passed away. Margaret was devastated. Anyone who has lost a spouse knows that grief isn't just an emotion. It's a physical presence, a weight that settles into your bones and never quite leaves. You find yourself reaching for the phone to call them, setting out 2 coffee cups instead of 1, turning to share a joke only to remember, with crushing finality, that they're gone. But Margaret had something most widows don't have. She had her husband's voice, still speaking, still warning people to mind the gap, playing on repeat at Embankment station on the Northern Line. So she started riding the tube. Not every once in a while. Every single day. Can you imagine that? An 80-something-year-old woman, navigating stairs and escalators, pushing through crowds of impatient commuters, all just to stand on a platform and hear 3 words in a voice she'd loved for over 50 years. While everyone around her rushed to catch their trains, checking their phones, lost in their own worlds, Margaret would stand perfectly still, waiting, listening. Mind the gap. There he was, her Oswald, still with her, in a way, still speaking. For years, this was Margaret's routine. The Underground staff began to recognize her. Some probably thought she was just another elderly person with nowhere else to go, killing time on the tube. But Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. She was visiting her husband. Then, in 2012, disaster struck. Transport for London, the organization that manages the Underground, decided it was time to update the announcement system. The old recordings, including Oswald's, were more than 60 years old. The sound quality was deteriorating. Technology had advanced. It made sense, from a practical standpoint, to replace them with new, digitally recorded messages. They replaced Oswald's voice with a newer, cleaner recording. A woman's voice now announced, "Mind the gap." For most writers, this was completely unremarkable. Probably 99% of people using Embankment Station didn't even notice. But Margaret noticed. One day, she descended the stairs to the platform, ready for her daily visit with Oswald, and instead, she heard a stranger. Her husband's voice, the one constant she'd had since his death, was gone, erased, replaced by someone who had never known him, never loved him, someone who was just doing a job. Imagine that moment. The betrayal of it, even though no one had meant to betray her. The sudden, shocking silence where his voice had been. Grief has a way of ambushing us when we least expect it, and this was an ambush of the cruelest kind. Margaret was heartbroken all over again. But here's where this story transforms from sad to inspiring, because Margaret McCullum didn't just accept this loss. She fought back. At 80+ years old, grieving and determined, Margaret reached out to Transport for London. She wrote to them explaining her situation. She told them about Oswald, about their marriage, about how she'd been coming to Embankment Station every day just to hear his voice. She told them what those recordings meant to her. And then she asked them for a favor that must have seemed impossible. Could they bring back Oswald's voice? Now, put yourself in the position of the Transport for London officials who received this letter. They had just completed a massive technological upgrade. They had replaced thousands of outdated recordings across the entire underground system. The idea of going backward, of reinstalling old audio files for one station, would have seemed absurd from a logistical standpoint. But they didn't see it as absurd. They saw it for what it was, a widow asking to hear her husband's voice one more time. What happened next is the kind of thing that restores your faith in humanity. The bureaucrats and managers at Transport for London, people who worked for a massive government organization not exactly known for sentimentality, decided that some things are more important than efficiency and modernization. They said yes. Not only did they say yes, but they went above and beyond. They didn't just restore Oswald's "Mind the Gap" announcement at Embankment Station. They tracked down the original master recordings that had been sitting in archives for decades. They cleaned up the audio, digitized it, and reinstalled it specifically at Embankment, the station Margaret visited every day. But they did something else too, something incredibly touching. They created a CD of all of Oswald's recordings and gave it to Margaret. For the first time since his death, she could hear his voice whenever she wanted, not just on a crowded platform surrounded by strangers, but in the quiet of her own home, where her memories of him lived. When this story broke in the media in 2013, it went viral. People around the world were captivated by Margaret's dedication and by Transport for London's compassionate response. News outlets everywhere covered it. Radio programs interviewed Margaret. She became, for a brief moment, famous. But I don't think Margaret cared about fame. She'd gotten back what mattered. The sound of Oswald saying, "Mind the gap." And here's what makes this story even more powerful. After the media attention died down, after the articles stopped being written and the TV segments moved on to other stories, Margaret kept riding the tube. She kept visiting Embankment Station. Because it was never about publicity or attention. It was always about love. Think about what this story tells us about grief, about memory, about the lengths we'll go to hold on to the people we've lost. In our modern world, we have photos and videos. We have voicemails saved on our phones. We have emails and text messages. We can preserve our loved ones in ways that previous generations couldn't even imagine. But even with all that technology, nothing quite compares to an unexpected encounter with someone's voice. There's something about audio, about hearing rather than seeing, that hits different. A voice carries personality in a way a photograph can't. You can hear someone smiling in their voice, hear their mood, their age, their essence. For Margaret, Oswald's voice on the underground wasn't just a recording. It was him, still existing, still present, still part of the daily fabric of London life. While millions of people had moved on, gotten older, been born and died, Oswald remained exactly as he had been in 1950. Young, clear-voiced, warning people to mind the gap. There's something almost supernatural about it, isn't there? The idea that we can leave echoes of ourselves behind, that our voices can outlive our bodies by decades, even centuries with modern technology. Oswald Laurence probably never imagined that his voice would still be playing in 2013, let alone that it would become a shrine for his widow's grief and love. But that's exactly what happened. Embankment Station became a memorial, a place where love conquered death, at least in one small, very British way. Now, I want to talk about Transport for London's decision for a moment, because it would have been so easy for them to say no. They had policies and procedures. They had a brand new system. Reinstalling old recordings for one person? That's not how bureaucracies typically work. Bureaucracies are about efficiency, consistency, treating everyone equally. But the people at Transport for London made a choice to see Margaret not as a problem or an exception, but as a human being deserving of compassion. They recognized that sometimes rules need to bend. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the efficient thing or the logical thing. Sometimes the right thing is simply the kind thing. This decision said something profound, that in a city of millions, where thousands of people rush through Embankment Station every single day without looking at each other, without thinking about the history soaked into those platforms, one person's grief matters. One person's love matters. This story raises questions that go beyond one couple, beyond one station. How do we honor the dead? How do we keep them alive in our hearts and in our world? And what are we willing to do, to sacrifice, to endure, to maintain that connection? For Margaret, the answer was clear. She'd ride the tube every day. She'd navigate crowds and stairs and the chaos of one of the world's busiest cities. She'd stand on a platform, sometimes for hours, just to hear 3 words. Some people might see that as sad, even morbid. An old woman unable to move on, trapped in the past, living in grief. But I don't think that's what this was at all. I think this was an act of defiance. Margaret was refusing to let Oswald be forgotten, refusing to let their decades of marriage be reduced to nothing but photographs and memories that would fade when she eventually passed away as well. By riding the tube every day, by eventually convincing Transport for London to restore his voice, Margaret made Oswald eternal in a way few of us will ever achieve. His voice is now part of London's cultural heritage. Articles have been written about him. His story has been told around the world. Tourists who have heard about Margaret and Oswald make pilgrimages to Embankment Station, listening for his voice, thinking about this love story that transcended death. Oswald Laurence, who recorded some announcements for a few pounds in 1950, has achieved a kind of immortality. And it's all because his wife loved him enough to ride the tube every single day. There's a Japanese concept called koi no yokan, which roughly translates to the sense upon first meeting someone that the two of you are going to fall in love. Margaret and Oswald must have had that when they met. They must have known, on some level, that they were looking at their future, their forever person. And even after forever ended, even after death separated them, Margaret found a way to extend their story, to keep their connection alive. In a world that constantly tells us to move on, to get over things, to be productive and forward-thinking, Margaret did the opposite. She looked backward. She held on. She insisted that her grief and her love had value, had meaning, deserved to be acknowledged. And the world listened. There's also something to be said about the random places where we encounter memory and meaning. A train platform is, on the surface, one of the most impersonal, transactional spaces imaginable. People go there to get from point A to point B. They're not there to contemplate life or death or love. They're there because they need to get to work or go home or meet a friend. But Margaret transformed Embankment Station into something sacred. She proved that meaning isn't just found in churches or cemeteries or designated memorial spaces. Meaning is wherever we make it. Love is wherever we find it. Memory is wherever we choose to honor it. How many thousands of people have rushed past Margaret on that platform over the years, completely unaware that they were witnessing something profound? How many have heard Oswald's voice without knowing the story behind it, without realizing they were hearing a love letter spoken across decades? That's the beautiful thing about this story. It's hidden in plain sight. It's ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. It's a reminder that profound human dramas are happening all around us, all the time, if we just pay attention. Margaret McCullum's story spread around the world because it touches something universal in all of us. We've all loved someone. We've all lost someone or fear losing someone. We all wonder what we do to hold on to the people who matter most to us. Margaret gave us an answer. She showed us that love doesn't have to be reasonable or practical. It can be obsessive and all-consuming and beautiful. She showed us that it's okay to hold on, that moving on isn't the only valid response to grief. She also showed us that sometimes, if you speak up, if you ask for what you need, if you're brave enough to share your pain with strangers, you might be surprised by the compassion you encounter. The world can be cruel and indifferent, but it can also be unexpectedly kind. Transport for London didn't have to help Margaret. They chose to. And in doing so, they became part of a love story that will be remembered long after their organizational mission statements and quarterly reports are forgotten. Today, if you visit Embankment Station on the Northern Line, you can still hear Oswald Lawrence's voice. Mind the gap. Those 3 words, recorded 75 years ago, continue to echo through the tunnels. And even though Margaret McCullum has likely passed away by now, joining Oswald wherever it is we go when we leave this world, their story lives on. Their story lives on in every article written about them, in every video like this one, in every tourist who makes a special trip to Embankment Station to hear a recording that means nothing to them personally, but everything to someone else. Their story lives on in the example they set. That love is worth fighting for, worth being inconvenienced for, worth looking foolish for. Because at the end of our lives, what really matters? Not our jobs, not our possessions, not our social media followers, or our carefully curated images. What matters is the connections we make, the people we love, and the lengths we're willing to go to honor those connections. Margaret McCullum rode the tube every day to hear her husband's voice. What would you do? What would you sacrifice? What would you endure? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're challenges, invitations to examine our own lives and relationships. Are we loving as deeply as we could? Are we present enough with the people who matter? Are we creating the kind of bonds that would survive death itself? Margaret and Oswald's story is a reminder that extraordinary love stories don't just happen in movies or novels. They happen in real life, on train platforms, in the spaces between coming and going. They happen when 2 people find each other and decide that nothing, not even death, will break what they've built together. So the next time you're rushing through your day, late for an appointment, stressed about work, lost in your own thoughts, take a moment. Look around. Notice the people near you. Consider that each of them has a story, a history, loves and losses and memories they carry. And if you're ever in London, if you ever find yourself at Embankment Station on the Northern Line, listen carefully. You might hear a voice from 1950 telling you to mind the gap. And when you do, remember Margaret. Remember Oswald. Remember that love echoes through time, and that sometimes the most profound acts of devotion are the simplest ones, showing up, day after day, just to hear the voice of someone you'll never stop missing. Trust me, fam, stories like Margaret and Oswald's are what make us human. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible true story. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. What would you do to keep someone's memory alive? Have you ever encountered an unexpected reminder of someone you've lost? Let's build a community of people who believe that love matters, that memory matters, that these stories deserve to be told and retold. And remember, mind the gap. But also, mind the people you love while they're still here to love back. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.